open this. Come in, sit close. Tonight is different. Once a month I open an older chest of stories, ones that found their way here before many of you did. Tonight, 3 tales of crossings, of bridges, gates, and roads that lead somewhere they shouldn't settle in. We have some distance to cover. Bridges occupy a particular place in Japanese folklore. They are boundaries, the space between one bank and another, between one world and another. They have always been understood as places where the boundary between the living and the dead grows thin. Most people cross bridges without thinking about any of this. They are simply a way of getting from one place to another. But those who cross old bridges late at night, alone, when the water below is dark and the bridge itself is empty, sometimes become aware of the particular quality that certain bridges carry. The sense of being in a space that belongs equally to both worlds, and of not always being the only one using it. I have crossed such bridges myself, in hours that most people would not choose to be crossing them, and I have learned that the figure you see at the railing is not always looking in the direction you assume. A man was walking home from a night shift along a route that took him across an old bridge over a river on the edge of the city. He had crossed this bridge many times. It was not a long crossing, perhaps 2 minutes from one bank to the other. The bridge was old enough to have a particular character. Stone railings worn smooth by many years of hands resting on them. The sound of the river below audible on quiet nights. He was perhaps halfway across when he noticed the figure, standing at the railing on the downstream side of the bridge, looking down at the water below. He slowed his pace. The figure was very still, standing at the railing in the particular way of someone absorbed in whatever they were looking at in the water below. He felt the particular concern that most people feel when they see someone standing very still at a bridge railing late at night. He stopped walking. He stood on the bridge and looked at the figure for a moment. It had not acknowledged his presence, simply continued to look down at the water with the complete absorption of something that had been doing so for a very long time. He called out, a simple word, an offer of presence, the kind of thing you say to someone who appears to need to know they are not alone. The figure stilled further at the sound of his voice, and then slowly, very slowly, it turned toward him. He saw its face in the low light of the bridge, and understood several things simultaneously. That the figure was not in distress, that it had not been in distress for a very long time, and that the concern he had felt upon seeing it standing at the railing had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of its relationship to the water below. If these stories have found their way to you, if you find yourself returning to this quiet room, there is something small you can do, like and subscribe. It tells me, and whatever else watches from this room, that you were here and that you intend to find your way back. He did not stop to examine what he had understood. He continued walking across the bridge at a pace that was not quite running but that covered the remaining distance with considerable efficiency. He reached the far bank and continued along the road toward home without looking back at the bridge. He arrived home and locked the door and sat in his kitchen for a while before going to bed. He thought about the figure at the railing, about the way it had turned toward him when he called out, about the face he had seen in the low light of the bridge, about what he had understood in that moment of seeing it, about the relationship between that figure and the dark water below the bridge, and about the fundamental error of assuming that someone standing at a bridge railing late at night is necessarily looking down. He changed his route home after that night. The new route added 15 minutes to his journey. He made this adjustment without resentment. Some detours are entirely reasonable given what they are detouring around. He mentioned the bridge to a colleague some weeks later. Not the full story, simply a casual remark about the bridge being an unpleasant crossing late at night. His colleague nodded without surprise, said the bridge had a history, that it was one of the older crossings in that part of the city, that it had seen a great deal over the years, that certain colleagues who worked night shifts and lived on the far side of the river had quietly rerouted their journeys home some time ago without making a particular point of explaining why. He was still uncomfortable when he told me. Not dramatically, simply the way a person carries something they have not entirely put down. He kept his voice steady, but his eyes moved toward the window occasionally while he talked, as though some part of him was still not entirely convinced that what he had seen on that bridge stayed on that bridge. He said the thing that stayed with him most was not the face. It was the moment just before, the stillness that followed his call, that brief and absolute stillness that suggested the figure had heard him, had registered his presence, and was deciding, in whatever way such things decide, whether to turn around. He said he had understood in that moment that the turning was a choice, that it did not have to turn, that calling out had made the turning possible, and that he had been the one who called. Shak Koi, that understanding, cold in a way that had settled into him and never entirely left. I think about bridges often, about what they represent in the geography of a city, the point where two banks meet, where two sides of something become navigable to each other. In folklore, they have always been understood as meeting points, not just between banks, between states of being, between the world the living occupy and the world that exists alongside it. Most bridges are simply bridges. Most crossings are simply crossings. But old bridges over dark water in the quiet hours of the night carry something of their history with them, something of everyone who has ever stood at their railings, looking down or looking up. And the wisest approach when you find yourself crossing such a bridge alone after midnight is to cross it quickly, and not to call out to anyone you see standing at the railing, because some of them will turn around, and the turning is not something you can unsee. Another whispered story from Japan, shared quietly here beside the kotatsu. If you cross old bridges late at night and you see a figure standing at the railing looking down at the water, keep walking. Do not stop. Do not call out. Simply cross the bridge as quickly as you can and continue on your way, because the figure at the railing may be looking down at the water, or it may be looking up from it. and there is no way to know which until it turns around. And once it has turned, once you have seen what turns to face you in the low light of an old bridge over dark water at midnight, the 15 minutes added to a new route home is not an inconvenience. It is the simplest and most reasonable thing in the world. Every torii gate in Japan marks a boundary between the ordinary world and the sacred space beyond it, between what is permitted and what requires permission, between the world of the living and the world that exists just alongside it. Most torii gates stand at the entrance to shrines. They are oriented, purposeful. The path through them leads somewhere specific, but occasionally, in forests where no shrine has ever been built, a torii gate stands alone, with no path leading to it, no shrine beyond it, no explanation for its presence, simply the gate, and the boundary it marks, and the question of what lies on the other side that required marking. Nda. I know such gates. I have passed through more than one. The forest always looks the same on the other side. It is only when you turn back that you understand what you have done. A woman was hiking through a dense forest in a mountainous area when she came across the gate. She was perhaps an hour from the nearest trail marker, in a section of forest that felt genuinely remote. Old growth, the kind of forest that has been left largely undisturbed for long enough to develop its own particular atmosphere. She almost missed the gate entirely, saw it through the trees slightly to her left, and altered her route to look more closely. A torii gate, traditional in its construction. Red paint faded to a particular orange that belonged to old lacquer rather than new. Standing upright, solid, entirely out of place in a forest with no shrine, no path, no indication of any human construction beyond the gate itself. She walked around it, examined it from both sides, then stood before it, and stepped through. The forest on the other side looked identical. The same trees, the same density, the same quality of light filtering through the canopy. She turned around immediately to look back through the gate. The gate was there, but it was facing the other direction. The side that had been facing away from her as she approached was now facing her, as though the gate had rotated while she passed through it, or as though she had come out on the side she had entered from, which the evidence of her own movement told her was not possible. She stood on the far side of the gate and looked at it facing away from her and felt the particular stillness of someone who has just understood that they have done something that cannot be immediately undone. If these stories have found their way to you, if you find yourself returning to this quiet room, there is something small you can do. Like and subscribe. It tells me, and whatever else watches from this room, that you were here and that you intend to find your way back. She passed back through the gate. It felt the same as the first time, simply walking through a structure in a forest. She turned around again. The gate was facing away from her again. She was back on the original side. She stood and thought carefully about what this meant. The gate appeared to orient itself so that whoever passed through it was always on the far side, always beyond the boundary, regardless of the direction of travel. She passed through it a third time, turned around, far side again. She stood on the far side of the gate and looked at the forest around her. It looked identical to the forest she had been hiking through, but the sounds were different, the birds were different. The wind moved through the canopy with a quality she could not immediately identify, but that registered as wrong in the particular way that something familiar made slightly unfamiliar registers. She stood very still and listened, and heard something moving toward her through the trees, not quickly, not dramatically, with the unhurried patience of something that had been waiting for this gate to admit a visitor and had just been notified, Shak Koi. That sound cold and purposeful in a forest that should have been empty. She passed back through the gate immediately, did not wait to see what was approaching, simply turned and stepped through, found herself on the original side, turned, far side again. She stopped, breathed, then did something different. Instead of turning back toward the gate, she walked forward, away from it, into the forest on what she believed was the original side, without checking which side she was on, without looking back. She walked for perhaps 20 minutes and found the trail marker she had passed an hour earlier. She was back. She walked out without looking back. She was still uncomfortable when she told me, not dramatically, simply the particular discomfort of someone who has understood something about the world that does not fit comfortably into the framework they previously used to navigate it. She said the thing that stayed with her most was not the gate itself, not even the sound of something moving toward her through the trees. It was the discovery that the only way back was to stop paying attention to the gate, to walk forward without checking, without verifying, simply trusting that the world she started in was still there ahead of her, and that looking back, turning around, trying to determine which side she was on, was precisely what kept her on the wrong side. The gate worked on attention, on the particular kind of attention that looks for boundaries and finds them. I think about boundaries, about what it means to mark a space as requiring passage rather than simple presence. A torii gate is not a wall. It does not prevent. It simply marks, says, what is on this side is different from what is on that side, and passing through acknowledges the difference. Most torii gates mark the entrance to shrines, sacred spaces maintained by human intention and practice. But the gate in the forest marks something older, something that predates the shrine tradition, something that required marking before marking had a formal language. Simply the gate, standing in the old growth, orienting itself toward whoever passes through, notifying whatever lives on the far side that a visitor has arrived, and waiting, with the patience of something that has been waiting since before patience had a word for it. And Danya, I have always known that certain boundaries exist for reasons that curiosity alone is not sufficient to justify crossing. Another whispered story from Japan, shared quietly here beside the kotatsu. If you find a torii gate standing alone in a forest with no shrine and no path, do not pass through it. Look at it carefully. Appreciate its presence, but do not step through, because the gate marks a real boundary between the world you are standing in and the world on the other side that required marking. And once you have passed through, the gate will orient itself to keep you on the far side and something in that forest will be notified and will begin moving toward you with the unhurried patience of something that has been waiting for exactly this kind of visitor for a very long time. And the only way back, as she discovered, is to stop paying attention to the gate and walk forward, away from it, into whatever lies ahead, and trust that the world you started in is still where you left it, waiting for you to find your way back. Bus drivers on rural night routes develop a particular relationship with their roads. They know every curve, every stop, every landmark that tells them where they are in the dark. They know which stops are used regularly and which have fallen out of use, which shelters are maintained and which have been left to weather. They know the rhythm of a quiet route at night in the way that only someone who has driven it many times in the dark can know it. And because they know it so well, they notice when something is wrong, when a stop that should be empty has someone standing at it, when a passenger boards from a shelter that has not been on the official route for years, when the mirror shows something in the back of the bus that the driver must decide, in the space of a breath, how to respond to. A bus driver had been operating a rural night route for 11 years. He knew the route completely, every stop, every road, every shelter, including the ones that were no longer in official use. The decommissioned stops still had their shelters in most cases, simply no longer appeared on the route schedule. No passengers expected there. No buses obligated to stop. On the night in question, he was perhaps 40 minutes into his route when he saw the figure at the decommissioned stop, standing in the shelter, facing the road, in the particular posture of someone waiting for a bus. He slowed. He could not have said why exactly. The stop was not on his route. He had no obligation to stop, but he slowed. And the figure stepped forward, and he stopped, and opened the doors. If these stories have found their way to you, if you find yourself returning to this quiet room, there is something small you can do, like and subscribe. It tells me, and whatever else watches from this room, that you were here, and that you intend to find your way back. The passenger boarded without speaking, without making eye contact, moved directly to the back of the bus and sat. The driver closed the doors and continued the route. He checked his mirror. The passenger was sitting quietly, looking out the window at the dark road passing, entirely still, in the way of someone who has done this journey many times and finds nothing in it requiring attention. The driver continued driving, checked his mirror at intervals. The passenger remained still, remained quiet. And then the driver noticed something about the window beside the passenger. The glass was fogging, slightly, from the inside, in the particular way that glass fogs when something cold is very close to it, from the inside of the bus, from the passenger's side. He drove, he did not stop, did not speak to the passenger, did not ask for a ticket or a destination, simply drove his route in the way he had driven it for 11 years and checked his mirror at the intervals he always checked it and noted the fogging glass with the controlled attention of someone who has made a professional decision about how to handle something unexpected. The passenger looked out the window. the glass fogged where their breath or their presence touched it. The driver kept his eyes on the road more than on the mirror. There are things that are better managed by peripheral awareness than by direct attention. He had understood this about his route long before this particular night. 3 villages further along the route the passenger stood, moved to the front of the bus. The driver opened the doors without being asked. The passenger stepped off at a stop that was currently in use, a legitimate stop, serving a village that existed on modern maps and modern routes. The driver watched in his mirror as the passenger walked away from the stop into the dark, moving with the unhurried pace of someone who knows exactly where they are going. He closed the doors, continued his route. At the end of his shift, he sat in his bus for a while before going inside. He checked the back of the bus. The seat where the passenger had sat was cold, the window beside it still slightly fogged, and on the glass, where the passenger's presence had been closest, a handprint, small, clear, from the inside. Shak Khoi, that handprint, he told me, cold and precise and exactly the size of a hand. He told me quickly, the way people tell things they want behind them. He said the thing that stayed with him was not the fogged glass or the handprint or even the decommissioned stop. It was the moment he slowed, that decision he could not entirely account for, to slow at a stop that was not on his route, for a passenger who should not have been there. He said he had driven past that shelter hundreds of times on previous nights without incident. Whatever had been standing there on this particular night had not been standing there on those previous nights. It had been there on this night specifically, and something in him had known to slow before he had consciously processed what he was seeing, as though part of him had been expecting it, had been ready for it, for longer than he knew. Rural bus routes in Japan often pass through areas where the population has declined significantly over decades. Stops that once served active communities now serve memories of them. Shelters maintained out of habit or bureaucratic inertia long after the last regular passenger used them. And I think about what it means for someone to still be waiting at those stops, still standing in the shelter at the right time, still facing the road with the patient posture of someone who has not been told the route no longer comes, who boards when a driver slows, who sits quietly for 3 villages, who gets off at a stop that still exists and walks away into the dark, going somewhere between the places that the modern route connects and the places that the old route used to connect, before the villages emptied, and the stops were decommissioned, and the schedules changed, for everyone still living along the route. Another whispered story from Japan, shared quietly here beside the kotatsu. If you drive a rural night route and you see a figure standing at a decommissioned stop, you must decide in the space of a breath what to do. Most drivers do not slow, do not stop, continue past the shelter and the figure in the dark, and tell themselves they did not see clearly at that speed on that road in that light. But some drivers slow, open the doors, Allow a passenger to board from a stop that has not been on the official route for years, and drive their route, and check their mirror at intervals, and note the fogging glass without speaking, and open the doors 3 villages later without being asked, and sit in their bus afterward, looking at the handprint on the inside of the window, small, clear, precise, left by something that needed to travel between places that the modern route no longer connects, and found a driver willing to slow down. 3 tales one evening beside the kotatsu. If tonight was a longer visit than usual, I hope it was worth the time. If these stories stayed with you, if the dark or the shadow feels a little closer tonight, you know where to find me. I am always here, beside the kotatsu, watching, waiting. And if you wish others to find their way here too, there is something small you can do, like and subscribe. I would not object, and I'll see you tomorrow for something shorter. Granny.